is neoliberalism, and the other is actually Soviet state socialism, both of which have an ideological definition, which says if you follow these rules, miraculously everything will work. Before those came along, it was much more pragmatic. It was what's going on, how can we modify it? What are the basic things that we can do which will shift things in the right direction? And in many ways, complexity is going back to that. So there's a game which it's a really good way of understanding how you manage strategy in a complex world. It's called Settlers of Catan. And the game goes in 2 rounds. In the first round, you compete to build the board on which you will play. And then after the board is built, in the second round, you then play on that board. Now, a complexity approach to strategy does not have objectives or goals or forecasts, because it knows in a complex world that is impossible. You're just deluding yourself. What it does is it says, where are we now? And what we can do to make the board more favorable to us, which is what S-Trine mapping is about. And then it also says you have to set up 2 things, monitors and scaffolding. Scaffolding gives you a degree of certainty. Monitors so you can see patterns emerging in the present, and you can exploit the ones which are beneficial and disrupt the ones which are non-beneficial. And the more you can respond to naturally occurring phenomena, the lower the risk of the intervention. The more you have to try and stimulate or force the emergence of phenomena, the higher the risk. For Ian and Marcello, this is new stuff, all right? This is just coming out, right? So that issue about risk management is there. But it's a very fundamental principle, is understand the present, map the present, try and change the present, monitor what's happening, stimulate what's happening, respond and exploit the opportunities. And if you want a depressing example of this, this is actually what Putin does internationally. He actually is not playing chess, he's playing Go. So the destabilization of Israel with the expulsion of Jews, Brexit, all he's trying to do is to change the board, and then he will seize the initiative when it presents itself. So I don't like to use Putin as an example of a complexity-based strategy, but that is a good example. You keep moving the present, you keep monitoring, you exploit quickly, and it's effectively courage is in the ability to do those early exploitations, to move forward.
Excellent, Dave. And Manuel, we know that this is not the common way executives deal with strategy, at least here in Brazil, right? So I think this is a huge and a very hard movement in order for people to understand all of that. And the great news that Dave is bringing to us today, there are practical ways. He mentioned the S-Trine mapping, and there are another concrete stuff that can help us with us. So how are you, both of you, dealing with that, and how are you using what we have, available to us to help with this movement in the strategy?
You're muted.
The microphone is closed, Manuel.
Oh, sorry. My gosh, sorry. Ian, do you like to start?
I can start. Firstly, great to hear you, Dave, and curious to hear of the new stuff that you're coming out with. What's interesting with our experience at Itaú, and we've been using a lot of S-Trine mapping with teams there, is there's a moment of deconstruction when you go into the beginning of the process of mapping, like Dave was mentioning with the game, of the idea of part of the day is actually spent creating the game or creating the map. There's a lot of frowning, like, really, you crazy? Like, why haven't you brought a canvas? Why haven't you brought something for us to start categorizing or thinking about? Which is fine for a whole bunch of challenges that a company like Itaú faces. But when we're looking at strategy and looking at the uncertain, it's interesting, this process of deconstruction. We have to have almost like a slide that says, like, just trust us, go with us. It's going to be difficult. We're going to talk about strange things like constraints and actants and constructors, and just go with us. And it'll all begin to make sense sort of after lunch. And it's very interesting. And I'm curious to hear what Manuel has also been experiencing, facilitating the process, that when they begin to see the map almost like emerge, then they start having all their insights. It's almost like as facilitators, you can go out and have a coffee because they're on it. They've understood it and they can see it. Insights begin to appear that we don't even understand the language. They're in their own world. They've created this map. And therefore, many insights, we've had feedbacks of things like, oh, we've received a whole bunch of enablers and connections and things that were placed close to each other that we hadn't seen before, but make a lot of coherent sense, and we're going to go and try things out. So it's very interesting that this process of Dave was mentioning of this first stage of needing to, like, the game is actually a two-stage game and not like arrive and just categorize and make decisions based on a canvas. So it's been a really interesting experience. But there is this sort of leap of faith at the beginning that you have to get people to just run with us. And they do, thankfully, but it is interesting that you have to convince them and kind of warn them. It's going to get a bit confusing at the beginning when they go into a bit of a misty gray area, and then we're going to come out with some cool stuff at the end. Yeah, Manoel.
Yeah, that's a good point, because like we are having here at the Cynefin Co Brasil similar experience for different clients, especially by using story mapping as a tool. However, the greatest challenge actually is not regarding the tool or any type of canvas. It's more the type of cognitive state people have in terms of strategy, right? First of all, like most of the time, people struggle to understand or to accept the fact that most of our risks about the future comes from the past, but you cannot predict the future, right? In the future, you're going to have different type of problems, but you don't know exactly. What you really have control is about the present, okay? And by doing that, like we need to understand exactly what is the real landscape of business for the company, for instance, right? And the biggest challenge as well is about the mapping and understand the terrain. Is exactly the idea that the terrain is always changing, right? And a map is easily could be out of date, okay? Then for us, for example, even like we are using story map as a tool, we are all the time encouraging and support our clients to keep a kind of continuous process of updating, reviewing, try to sensing the change. And by sensing the change, we're talking as well about sense making, right? It's like how can you use this type of collective approach to get different perceptions about the reality and bring all together to try to create a common meaning, a common understanding about, okay, what could be possible to do now? What are the affordances? For instance, like you have been talking about a lot about affordance in your client. What exactly is available in the system, in the environment, to allow some kind of strategic moves in the company, inside of the company, and external to the company as well. Then, yeah, but it's still a challenge. It's not easy, right? There is a big challenge created by the academia as well. People have this type of like traditional way of thinking in terms of you should create a big plan, you should create a purpose, a vision, a set of values, a set of goals for 3-5 years, but sometimes that's not so much reasonable when or plausible when you think about complex or uncertainty as well.
Just to add something on that, one of the advantages about being 70 years old is you've seen a lot of cycles go around. So I remember in the 80s and 90s when systems thinking came into vogue, and we had Porter's 5 forces and strategic intent and the whole planning approach to strategy. Everybody said it was a bit academic, it wasn't familiar, nobody knew what the hell it was about. And then 3 years later, it was the norm. And that's what actually happens when you get these big shifts. The interesting thing is we're going back to something which is actually closer to scientific management, in that strategy is emergent, it's not engineered, it's grown. And I think what you see in scientific management, the metaphor is a military metaphor. A military command and control system is highly adaptive. It knows that no plan will, survive the first encounter with the enemy, to quote Clausewitz. So it assumes description and interaction and fast communication is key to exploit opportunities. Systems thinking brings in an engineering metaphor where everything has to be planned and structured and resourced. And now with complexity, we're going back a long way towards the military concept, but with ecological things added to it. So it's opportunistic and descriptive, I think is one way to talk about it.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing, Tatiana, very quickly?
Sure. Go ahead.
Edgar Morin, the famous philosopher, he mentioned like strategy is a kind of continuous process of like building and rebuilding decisions. You know, like you all the time you are like, you know, creating a new understanding, a new perception about what exactly is the movements. Then yeah, that's why strategy is a living stuff, not a fixed stuff.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Manuel, and thanks, Dave, for clarifying the difference between system thinking and complex thinking. I think there is a great confusion around this. So thank you so much for that. And Dave, just for us to talk a little bit more about these stages of time, right? Past, present, and future. And as you have clarified, it's more efficient to direct our attention to the present in order to see possibilities, risk, in order to create the future and right. And then, so can you please talk a little bit more? Why is it so difficult for us to understand and to see and to connect the dots in the present to avoid unwanted consequence? And why is it so easy for us to look at the past and see clearly our mistakes?
It's called retrospective coherence in complexity. So with the benefit of hindsight, everybody can tell you what went wrong. So you see this, and I'll come back to risk in a minute, all right? So generally when people are determining strategy, they tend to focus on past failures. So the human race is actually geared up to learn from failure rather than success anyway. So you do a retrospective study on things which have failed in the past, and then you come up with this wonderful phrase which you use, which is, why didn't we join at the dots? Yeah, famous statement. You see it in congressional report on 9/11. So the idea is, we now know we should have paid attention to this, because if we paid attention to this, we could have avoided this better outcome. Now, if you take the mathematics of dots, if there are 4 dots, there are 6 linkages between the dots, which means there are 64 possible patterns that can form from the dots and the linkages. If I go up to 10 dots, and in a physical workshop, I'd ask people to guess and write a number down. And generally, the more senior people are, the lower the number they guess, which is a bit depressing. And numbers can range between 200 or 300 and a few million. The actual figure is just over 3.4 trillion. And if I go up to 12 dots, it's just over 4.8 quadrillion. There's an old Chinese story about this called the Emperor's Chessboard, in which a sage asked for a reward by the emperor to have 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard, double thereafter. There isn't enough rice in China. So how many dots are there in the human system? How many possible patterns are there? Yeah, the danger is we can always set a causal chain if we look backwards. But the key phrase here is, hindsight doesn't lead to foresight if the system is complex. So the description of the present is important. This is also, and I think the way I focus this when I talk about it to CEOs, is complexity-based strategy is about reducing risk and reducing cost and increasing effectiveness. Because if you don't understand complexity, you see uncertainty as directly correlated with risk. If you understand complexity, you realize that's not the case. Because the way you manage a complex system is very different, because you accept the uncertainty is actually an opportunity, not a threat, if you can actually monitor for emergence. So I think one of the really important points those of us involved in this have to make the point is, I mean, if take something like S-stream mapping, which is also called an affordance map, we normally combine that with what's called an assemblage map, which is to look at the patterns of belief or attitudes, which determine how people see the world, and some degree of agency. That's called the 3 A's: agency, affordance, assemblage, which is a key framework. So basically, if you start to understand that, you can understand the dispositional state of the present. You can start to understand where you are likely to miss seeing things, and you can then create monitors to see those things. If you've got very fast feedback loops, so you can consult the whole of your workforce in real time within 5 minutes, which is something we can do, right? Then you can use your workforce as a sensor mechanism to spot those weak signals and move forward. So you actually start to use uncertainty to your advantage rather than seeing it as a threat.
Right. Yeah, great. Thank you so much. All right. I would like to move to another topic now. And I know this one, and Dave, just for you to know, in our audience, there are a lot of people that work with Agile and Agile transformation. And I'd like to bring a topic that is very common in Agile people discussion, and this is seen as challenge, which is changing people mindset. And the
Great question, great topic.
It's a great topic, right?
Well, just for your courage in asking that question to this member of an audience.
Okay, you can go and let just like David talking now.
We'll see you in half an hour then, everyone, right?
Yeah, right.
Go for it, Dave. Shoot.
I can be a lot quicker on this, all right? First of all,
I'm
Agile.
very excited to hear from you on this, Dave.
I'll make a general point first. Agile is in a mess.
Sure, go ahead.
So Agile is currently in a mess. Scrum Masters have been laid off en masse worldwide, and that was inevitable. I mean, I've lived through 3 recessions, and I've managed not to lay off staff during either of the previous 2, and I think I can survive this one, right? Managing a recession is a very different field. The one thing you do not want to be is an overhead. And what Agile did is to create a whole bunch of people who did nothing else but help other people do the work. So they were, to use an old adage, going to be the first to the wall come the revolution. Yeah, financial directors don't like overheads. So that's a line through the thing. The other thing is Agile allowed itself to become commoditized. SAFe was actually the indication of that. The creation of a rigid recipe, when the spirit of Agile was to create chefs, not recipe book users. And that's a fundamental metaphor. Now, before I move on to mindset, we have actually just launched a major initiative which includes people like scrum.org, team topologies, Kanban, Essence, Agile 42 and others, to break all of the major Agile methods and tool sets down into smaller units, which can then be combined and recombined in different ways. So you can create multi-vendor, multi-tool solutions. And to me, we waited for the commodification before we launched that, because now the market is ready for a different approach to software development, which is not a proprietary lockdown. And each of those things, they're called hexes, is effectively a cooking ingredient, but you can put the ingredients together in different combinations to produce something unique to your context. So that's one side of this, yeah? The mindset thing is a problem, all right? Now, and some people use mindset properly, but generally the way it's used is a bad one. It's the way which is linked to mental models. And there are no such things as mental models. I mean, that's a 1970s notion based on the assumption that the human brain is some sort of computer, yeah, which is, it's called the intelligent camera myth in cognitive neuroscience. We're not an intelligent camera. The way we make decisions is we have multiple memories, multiple hallucinations, multiple imaginations at a micro level. Those are interacting, they're entangled with multiple signals coming into us, which, by the way, we know that things like scent and magnetic resonance are part of that, which you don't get in the virtual community. And those form patterns, and the minute we get a pattern which seems to work, we apply it, right? That's not a mental model, and it's not a mindset. It's a response to a particular context. And a lot of that processing is done by our bodies or by our social environments, our social structures that we grew up in. In fact, less than 10% of the decisions we made are made cognitively, right? That's 101 science. And the trouble with the way mindset is used is, I've just done a $1 million, $2 million implementation of SAFe. It hasn't produced a single development. The release trains aren't working. Well, the problem is you guys didn't have the right mindset. Yeah, it's kind of like it wasn't my fault. It was your fault. It's everybody out there's fault because they didn't have the right mindset. If only you had the right mindset, magically everything would have worked, all right? And the reality is, as Dennin said, and many other people have said, it's the processes and the interactions which matter, not the individuals. right? So mindset is practically wrong, and it's also very dangerous because it gets you into this idea that you've got a right to change how people think. You've got a perfect right to change how people interact, but you've got no right to tell them how to think.
Yeah. So changing the way people interact, you can help people be in a position to decide if they want to change or not, right? Because
it's more than that as well. I mean, it's actually to some extent easier to explain this in a Catholic country than a Protestant country. Sorry to get back to religion on this, but you know my own religion on this. Basically, what Protestant did was to focus on the individual. So everything is a result of individual choice. If you go into Catholicism, Hinduism, Taoism, then actually the individual arises from their interactions in communities over time. Now, we also know that people are very bad individual decision makers. Yeah, our primary decision groups are a sexual pair, an extended family, and a clan. And collectively, we're really good decision makers. And when people make decisions in roles, like in army units or operating theaters in hospitals, the stress chemicals in the brain aren't released. Whereas when they make decisions as individuals, the stress chemicals in the brain are released. So one of the big things we're working on at the moment, we just got provisional agreement to the first major trial in the NHS, is to distribute decisions to role combinations of 5 roles or less, in which one of the roles is anonymous. So you've got what's called a panopticon effect, you've got honesty. And we think that can take over half of the admin cost out of a hospital, mean decisions can be made in hours, not in days, and also increase clinical engagement. Because we're recognizing the reality of human beings is we evolved to make decisions in multifaceted role groups, not as single individuals. So the whole mental models mindset thing it's not just bad science, it's actually bad effectively, because it forces people into highly stressful situations where they're going to make worse decisions. And if you think about it, every good CEO takes 5 or 6 people with them who can complement their weaknesses. We make decisions in groups, not as individuals.
Right. And so one thing that I'm learning with you here is that we need to find ways to make decision in small groups.
Yeah.
Right. This is something I'm learning now from you.
And by the way, it's role combinations, Titania. So for example, it's one of the areas where we use neurodiversity. So I'm dyslexic, right?
Right.
That means I can't pronounce a word until I fit from the text. I have to hear it 15 or 16 times before I can pronounce it properly. I read a page at a time. I don't read a line at a time. It takes a lot of effort to do that. You combine me with somebody who's autistic, it's a really powerful pair. Right. And so this recognition that diverse things coming together in different ways, that's actually how we evolved, because it gives us resilience.
Yeah. And I have a question to you about this, about diversity, but I just want to add a comment about something I'm learning here with you today. Another thing is that it doesn't make sense to blame people's mindset when initiatives fails, right?
Yep, that's it.
Yeah. Okay. So, Manoel, would you like to add something on that?
Yeah. I think like when you think about agile, in fact, like it became a kind of big mess, right? I think the market itself is quite like trouble nowadays. And for me, like the biggest problem is we had to put too much focus on roles, especially like by trying to change people's values, people's way of thinking, for instance, which is impossible for sure. As Dave mentioned, like you should try to change like the interactions, not the way that people thinking, for instance. And other problem is you had to put too much focus on try to create a culture first. You know what I mean? Let's change the culture. Let's run a big cultural transformation, those type of things. But most of the time, people forget that actually culture is an emergent property, right? Which means like it's a result of what we're doing in the day by day, not the other way around. Okay, like you don't create a culture first, right? Then I think like that's was one of the biggest problems we had when you think about the agile market, agile community, this type of thing.
Excellent, Manuel. Yeah.
Hi. No, I love Dave's provocation on this, and it's so interesting also that so many of the HR and management principles that are kind of 100 years or so old still have this idea that a grown adult can't make good decisions on their own, and we have to tell them exactly how to think, and it's almost this mechanistic. We treat them, just the fact we go human resources. I mean, that's treated as a resource. This seems a bit wrong, and I think it's just there's also, I mean, Dave in his Cynefin courses always mentions, the idea that human beings have the three I's, of anthro-complexity. We're looking at, that humans aren't, it's not healthy and not even very good science or good decisions to treat humans as, either CPUs or cogs in a machine. We're neither ants nor machines, kind of thing. So the anthro-complexity, looking at the fact that, if you, the number of dots that Dave was mentioning before, and you add into those dots that, we all have identities and we all have intelligence, and intent, adds just more dots to the equation, So this idea that you should manage and help people make decisions much by creating the conditions to help them make different decisions. And, I love the concept of descriptive self-awareness, that you give them the power, and to a certain extent, I think S-ray mapping, as many of the Cynefin tools are applied for that, is how can you give people the ability to see where they are in the present, and from that make better decisions on their own. Yeah. There are very few adults that actually need to be told, here, let me hold your hand, I'll make the decision. As long as they can see the context with better clarity, most of them, if they can handle breakfast with a family and kids in the morning, they usually can handle pretty complex challenges quite well. But sometimes the whole idea of transparency and keeping things from being shared in different ways, people don't have a full sense of what they're into and what they're looking at, and therefore tend to make skewed decisions. So I think it's excellent.
Yeah, and it's much more efficient. Concentrate in all of that, other than changing the culture, changing people's mindsets, which you can do nothing about, right? Okay.
Yeah, and I just love, I mean, just the word mindset. Why on earth would you want someone with a set mind working for you? It's just like, it's kind of, it's in the hashtag is like, it's kind of telling you that it's in the word. Why would you want people with set mindset?
Yeah.
With one way of thinking. Well, I would never hire someone because I have one way of thinking. Well, let's hire that person because they have one way of thinking. Well, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's a challenge indeed. Yep.
And I'd like to connect that with a word that Dave mentioned when you were talking about and explaining the importance of making decisions in small groups, Dave. So you mentioned the word diversity. So I have a question on that. So I understand that diversity matters, right? Diversity matters, and I'm talking about complexity. But what kind of diversity is important? Because I think there is a mess around that, right? And I would like you to clarify what kind of diversity we should be worried about.
Okay, so a couple of things up front. First of all, we're less talking about small group decision making. We're talking about small numbers of roles making decisions. Okay. So that's really important to understand. So if you look at a clinical team, you've got a doctor, a nurse, a triage nurse, and an anesthetist. It's the roles which give it its strength, not the individuals. Yeah. And when the individuals scrub up, that's a ritual which switches them into roles. So that's one qualification. Right? There are several forms of diversity. So one which is basic is called transgenerational, or the young driver syndrome. So a recently qualified driver will see things that an experienced driver won't, because an experienced driver has actually become habituated. So the Australians, for example, do not allow a young person, once they've passed their driving test, they can't drive with passengers other than elderly relatives for 2 years. Because it takes 2 years for the brain and the body to habituate itself to the point where it can drive and pay attention to a conversation without risking an accident. And by the way, that's a really good strategy. Right? But then once you get habituated, you don't notice things that the naive driver is noticing. So we will, for example, put a very young doctor together with a 30-year experienced consultant. or we'll put a young coder together with a systems architect. So that's one thing. Secondly, you need diversity of function. So for example, we'll put a user trained to talk to IT people in with the young person and the systems architect. Yeah, so there's a user perspective in on it. And that's called an entangled trio, by the way. And 15 of those trios are a damn sight more effective and a damn sight cheaper than a systems analyst interviewing people in terms of the way it works. You also, and this is a new area which we're just starting to explore, is to measure identity differences. Yeah, rather than, because at the moment, identity diversity is generally measured by a proxy such as skin color or gender, whereas actually attitudinal diversity is what you want.
Oh, yeah.
So we're currently developing ways to measure attitudinal diversity to feed into team formation. Yeah. And that also, by the way, you know, side effect, as I think, is throwing us out a new peace and reconciliation technique. And we can find people, say, with different colored skins or different genders or different political backgrounds who actually have the same attitudes and put them together in teams. So that, and then that we can break below the surface level. So those are the sort of areas we're looking at diversity at the moment. And give me another month or so, and we'll actually have a list of rules to generate diversity based on the context of role formation. But for the moment, gender diversity, attitudinal diversity, functional diversity. Yeah, I kind of like that.
Yeah. So what you were saying is that we should be concentrated in attitudes and identity. So it doesn't
Yeah, and it's a small group thing. So this comes from theoretical biology. So the fundamental unit in humans is still a sexual pair. That's still a very strong decision-making unit. Yeah. And that automatically gives you some diversity. The maximum number of decision makers in an extended family is 5, possibly 7. Asymmetry is important. So we know that the behavioral pattern in groups of 5 or 7 is radically different than the behavioral patterns in 9 or 12 or 13. So again, you're starting to look at those sort of units, and you're starting to look at when they can come together and when they need to be different. So having, 15 groups of 3 working on a problem in parallel means I'm going to see things I wouldn't see if I had one team of 12 who would force a consensus.
Right. Okay.
So again, I'll come back to this. If you think about it, a young programmer, systems analyst, user trained to talk to IT people, 15 of those working part-time for 3 months is a lot cheaper than a systems analyst interviewing people and writing up documents. It will spot things which I wouldn't otherwise spotted. And it has a side benefit of delivering a network between IT people and users, which will carry forward into the project because there's already that trusted relationship. And again, that reduces cost, it reduces risk.
Right. Okay.
Tatiana, can I add something on top of that?
Sure.
On my experience, well, if you look at the Cynefin ecosystem, one of the frameworks that we have there is a framework called ASHING. ASHING stands for artifacts, skills, heuristics, experience, and natural talent. Okay.
Habits, not heuristics these days, Manuel.
Habits, yes, good.
Sorry,
perfect, yeah.
I had to correct myself earlier as well.
Yeah. They've changed his method like all the time. Like, even during the training, he's changing methods. He's quite like fast in doing that. That's interesting. In my experience, like when you have more diverse in terms of the combination of those characters, especially like experience or natural talent, for instance, like the result would be much better. Then my point is, like, you can use the ASHING as a way to see, as a lenses, as a set of lenses to help us to understand how could it be an interesting way to foster this type of diversity in the environment, in a team, for instance.
Okay. Yeah, anything to add?
Yeah, just to add to that, I haven't shared this with Dave yet, so it'll be new, but more and more recently, when we've been running the facilitation processes that we run at the bank, we ask beforehand, and this is not the easiest thing to translate into English, Dave, but basically, who are your godparents? And they go like, what? So, because usually they just wanted to like say, I don't know, credit cards. It's a credit card team. Well, like, who are your godparents? And they look at me like, what do you mean by godparents? Well, who depends on you and who do you depend on? And they start to think, well, treasury or, risk or whatever, we'll get a few of them in as well. Well, but it's not, they don't know what would, that's fine. We say, just bring a few of your godparents in, people that either depend on you or you depend on, and they will wear they'll be in the role of credit cards. So they'll try and do their best to pretend that they're you, but they'll bring in their concepts because they either issue you stuff or depend on you for content or data or whatever, but they have a very different perspective. So it's still a distance from entangled trios, but we're beginning to bring these people in from different areas and sometimes quite distant. And it's been amazing that the content that these people bring, because they're not specialists, they don't know, they bring in the naive perspectives, but they have enough context to share that they have a common language, they share a commonality that has enough. But because they bring in this naive perspective, it's really interesting the value that these, and that's why we've given this interesting name of padrinhos and madrinhas, so that the godparents that give these interesting perspectives, and sometimes just 10 or 15% of the whole group are made up of these godparents, and they bring in a huge amount of value into the discussions.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, and it's really impressive how we see how minimizing the importance of context, right? So, moving straight to thinking about solutions and what they want to do without understanding where they are, and thinking and exploring and go deeply on that. So thank you so much. And now I'd like to move to another topic that we are seeing people discussing all the time currently, which is AI. Dave, I just saw right before this meeting a statement in LinkedIn, and I said, God, I was thinking about a question to bring here today about AI, and I saw the statement, and I'd like to share with you, and I like to bring that up here for comments. I think it's the best way for us to discuss that. So let me share what I saw, and then I will turn it over to you. This is what I saw.
Oh, that one. Oh, God, yeah. Right. I responded to that.
Oh, you did? So I think
responded
you
to
can share
that.
your responses with us here.
Yeah, so the first question, I basically said, I want to raise some ethical issues on that. And this is an ongoing discussion. Because what the guy did is he took stories collected, he transcribed them, and then got an AI bot to find meaning in it. Now, there are several ethical questions on this. The first of all is, did you tell people you were going to do that with their stories when you captured them? All right, that's a major ethical issue, and I haven't had an answer on that back yet. Right. Secondly, if you transcribe people's stories when they're being collected orally, they have different meaning. Yeah, because the tone of voice and everything else actually counts. Secondly, if you get AI to interpret, the AI is just matching the words against the most common patterns it's got. So what you get, and if you look at the thread, the results it came up with, just anodyne consultancy platitudes. They mean nothing. Right? And the problem you got with AI is what matters in AI is not the algorithms, because they just throw bigger and bigger computing power at very similar algorithms, if I'm honest, all right? What really matters is the training data sets. What do you train them on? SenseMaker was originally developed 25 years ago for the US government to create epistemically balanced training data sets. And if you read a paper called Scholastic Parrots, it was written by a Google employee when it was published by an ex-Google employee because they fired her. She revealed the truth about the bias in the training data sets. So there's a key difference here is there are three types of logic: deductive, inductive, abductive. Yeah. Deductive, if A, then B, that's a decision rule. Inductive, all the cases of A have B, so I assume some linkages. AI works on inductive logic. Right? Abductive, on the other hand, is what human beings evolved to do, which is known as what's the most plausible connection between apparently unconnected things. And art is critical to abductive capability in humans, as is metaphor. So AI cannot think abductively, it can only think inductively. The danger on AI is we give AI magical properties. So we stop thinking abductively and we surrender to the inductive, rush to the norm. And as I said this ages ago, 20 years ago, somebody said, do you think AI will exceed human beings in intelligence? And I said, yes, because we're planning to meet them halfway. Right? And that is still the danger. The danger is not that because it can't. The danger is we lose our capacity to actually innovate and think in unexpected ways or unconnected ways because we rely on something which is just doing a probability distribution.
Right. Manuel, and yeah, so how are you dealing with AI?
That's a great topic. I love that topic because, for example, I really believe we have a problem in terms of the balance between level of codification and the level of abstraction. Machines in general, they are quite good to handle low level of codification, but they're not so good to handle with abstraction, right?
Yeah.
That's the real challenge thing. It happened because machines, again, use knowledge from the past. They cannot like see the future or try to create connections about the things that they are not unknown, for instance. That's the biggest problem for us. Then you must accept that AI in general is quite good to handle with ordered problems, complicated problems at maximum, for instance, okay? But when you think about the complexity, like AI maybe is not that good yet to do this type of approach, to be honest.
Excellent.
And I would argue it will never be that good. It's a priori can't be, right? And it's like quantum mechanics. So you see people talk about quantum effects at human level. A thing called Heisenberg's cuffs. Beyond a certain level, quantum effects no longer apply. And the same is true, inductive, abductive. You just can't use one as a proxy for the other.
Yep.
Yeah. And you brought a great explanation, Dave, about the way our brain makes decisions, right? And I think this has nothing to do with the way machines work, right? So
no, absolutely none. And the downside is it makes us very prone to conspiracy theories. So we're really good at seeing connections between things which probably don't exist. And that hasn't evolved in us because it's bad. It's evolved in us because it gives us huge adaptive capacity. So Gary Klein, myself, and others say there is no such thing as cognitive biases. They're actually cognitive heuristics. At a species level, they have utility. All right. So take a general assumption. If we do something in a certain way, it's had evolutionary advantage. And some of my best ideas have come in the opera or walking around an art gallery. Because what art does is it disconnects you from the day-to-day, so you see novelty. Yeah? And that's the point Manuel's making is, machines can't handle abstraction because everything has to be tokens. Whereas human beings, we're a symbolic species. That's the key thing. We're symbolic. We're semiotic, all right? And we're social. And a lot of the way we make decisions is picked up by loose social connections. And by the way, by things like scent. So a lot of our trust decisions are made based on how people smell. All right. So there's human capacity for decision making, which you can never reflect in silicon. The way carbon is not silicon, they're very different.
Okay. Yeah.
How to to be honest, the hype curve is coming to an end now. The models of the hallucinations are increasing because the models are feeding off their own data. Now, anybody who knows anything about statistics knows that model degradation happens if you feed off model output. Microsoft are reporting a reduction in coding accuracy using AI because it started to feed off itself, right? So, and I use ChatGPT a lot, all right? I mean, it's really good if you say, look, I've invented a method which does these things. Can you think of a name for it? It's really good at that. Yeah. So, don't knock me. It's a useful tool. But I noticed I use Grammarly Professional, right, which is an AI system, quite an advanced one actually. And for dyslexic, it's huge because it gets rid of all the grammar and spelling mistakes. You're not reliant on people pointing them out. But what I found is if I accepted its recommendations, I start to lose my voice. I start to write sales speak because that's the dominant stuff on the internet. And instead of writing something original with some bite to it, I'm writing anodyne material. So again, we need to be really careful on this because it's a race to the bottom of a normal distribution when we should be operating in the tails of a Pareto distribution.
Can I add one more thing about that, Tian? Sorry. I think we also have a kind of risk in terms of losing agency, right? People start to lose agency about making decisions in the day-by-day life. You know what I mean? For example, for instance, like nowadays, nobody takes decision about the best road to go to home, because the Waze, the Google Maps, for instance, they do it for you, right? But when you think about different applications of AI, for example, creation or trying to identify what could be the best method or the best solution for some type of problem, again, over time, I believe like maybe people will start to lose agency, the power of making decisions about some things.
It's bigger than that as well. I mean, I had an argument about this with Sam Polizano when he took over as CEO of IBM, because he wanted Fountain Park, which is a precursor, to actually replace middle management. He said, senior executives can issue instructions. We don't need middle management. And I said, where the hell do you think senior executives of the future are going to come from if they don't actually do the manual stuff as middle managers? So we were actually, those things which AI can do better than us, we still need to do, because otherwise we won't develop the higher capacity. So it's the substitutional dangers which are a problem here.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think just to add to what Dave was saying is the magic of it. I think what's caught on with a lot of people with ChatGPT is that it seems like magic. The fact that it can explain Cynefin in a poem or something like that. People don't know. If you don't know Cynefin too well, you'll be quite impressed that it's made all the domains rhyme with something clever, and it's really it is clever. But if you start looking at it, it begins to fall apart.
It's an idiot savant. It's an idiot savant because every time I ask it a question about something I know something about, I think, oh my God, how terrible. If I ask it a question about something which I know nothing about, it sounds terribly impressive.
Yes,
and that's kind of like a big red flag if you think about it.
So we've been using ChatGPT as an accessory to looking at things differently. So it's a bit like, well, we've done this facilitation, you've done some clustering, and what we've done, we've clustered everything else because of the power of computation. But have a look at this. Do any of these make sense to you, to what we've been looking at? And red marker them. No, and we put on the absurd ones, almost like a flag that this has come from just algorithms.
You've raised a really important point there, Ian, is that the AI hallucinates, human beings hallucinate. But human beings have developed the capacity to understand rational hallucinations and non-rational hallucinations. And that's an evolved capacity, right? And whereas AI hasn't, it treats all hallucinations equally.
We asked the bot once do you know of Dave Snowden's future backwards? And yes, I've understood Dave Snowden, and it's about this. And it gave all the qualities of running future backwards. And I said to the analyst, ask them, what are the risks of running future backwards? Where do you risk at running a complex facilitation? And it repeated the same list back of the properties. It replied that the properties suddenly became the risks. I said, well, they just chucked the whole thing out. But the person who was running it, who didn't know future backwards that well, was so impressed. Look at it, it's given me this wonderful list. I can now explain it. And then we said, well, explain the risks. And it was the same. It was like, oh, it's like it's just trying to con me. So I think but the risks, I think, is what Dave was saying, is that if you don't have the expertise knowledge and you haven't become a middle management, the risk of you thinking that the answers will come from this app become bigger and bigger as time goes on.
I got told the other day that I didn't understand my own framework. And that was AI generated material. I got a badge for it. And
Yeah.
I only got 50% on the exam, but I got a badge, and that was AI scrape material.
There you
At least
go.
I'm pretty sure it was.
Yeah. Well,
But just to add to this, what I think is really interesting, just to add to that is, which I think is provocative, is to ask the ChatGPT to give a criticism based on certain reading. So for instance, please read everything that Dave Snowden has written in his blog and ask for, what do you think Dave would say to this? And some of the provocations are really quite good. And then you can ask, what would Plato say to this? What would, if there's a lot of content, what would Shakespeare say to this? And it gives these strange replies. Sometimes it gives you a rabbit hole for you to dive down and to help your own thinking. So I think that is sometimes helpful. It's, you can kind of have a conversation almost with different personas that help your sense making, but you shouldn't be doing copy pasting into making it your own.
Yeah, great. Well, I knew this topic would be very time consuming. So this was why this one was the last question and this one was the last topic. So we still have half an hour and we have a couple of questions from people. So I'd like to bring as much questions as you can to try to give some response. So I copied some of them here and I will share my screen so you can read the questions the way they are. And feel free to respond.
I think it's likely to hinder cooperation because it gives a sort of series of false positives or false negatives. Not sure about that, to be honest. I think the danger is it reduces people's willingness to make their own judgment. So let me illustrate it from a project I did for one of the big oil companies, in that they hadn't discovered oil for about 2 years and they were getting embarrassed. So I did field ethnography, came back to Aberdeen and said, we need to take out the AI. Because what they'd done is the geophysicists had trained a system to tell them whether oil was more or less likely. But the behavioral result was if the geophysicists felt there was oil, but the AI said there wasn't, they wouldn't order a drill because it was too risky. Whereas if the AI said there was oil, even if they thought there wasn't, they'd drill there because they wouldn't get blamed for it. So effectively, because the AI was averaging previous good decisions rather than understanding current decisions, it was the behavioral implications was people wouldn't take risks. So we took the AI away and within a few weeks, they started to find oil again. So the danger is we become dependent on things in areas where we need novelty and human judgment and human conversations. AI is actually quite dangerous because it increases the risk of it makes risk-taking more risky rather than less risky.
So what you were saying, Dave, is that we will be dependent on AI, on things that AI not able to help us, right?
Yeah, or it's basically reflecting what decisions we made in the past, whereas we actually understand decisions in the future will be different. AI is always backward looking, right? And the danger is it's the risk factor. If I go against and these AI has magical significance, if I waste 3 million drilling into the North Sea and there's no oil there, I'm in deep shit if the AI told me I shouldn't. So I won't do it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Ian Manoel, feel free to add anything you'd like to if you think you can, complement on something, right? If not, I'll move on to next question.
No, that's good. Just to add something here, I think as well, one of the dangers is exactly because AI, they use a kind of common sense about things. Like they're not good to spot like difference or abnormal things, like the famous 17% that doctors cannot see the gorilla stuff there, Dave. I think like that's the challenge, like you're just repeating patterns, well-known patterns, but we are not like having space for novelty. That's the biggest challenge as well.
Interesting. We've used AI a lot over the last 30 years. I've been involved in it since Prolog days. If you use it to say to human beings, something is odd going on here, look at it, it has utility. If you use it to make the decisions, it doesn't.
Yep.
So anomaly detection and forcing human attention, that's a really good use of AI.
Yeah. All right, so let's.
No, just adding that I was chatting, Dave, to a very good and former colleague of, to Viv Reed in Australia. And I asked her the question, what is your greatest fear of AI? And she, similar to what you said, says accountability. The fact it's a bit like that story of, no one ever got fired for hiring McKinsey, or no one ever got fired for hiring IBM. You won't get fired if you've got an AI that says, look, the AI said I should have done this and I did it. Therefore, I'm not accountable. And that goes into, military warfare and automatic drones. It's not my fault that, the family got shot or got, because the AI say that's where I thought that the probability of being a terrorist in that house was high, and therefore without wasn't not my call.
And we've seen that the last month a lot.
I know. So I think that's one of the risks of saying, well, the general, won't resign because he says, well, it's, our AI model said there was, pity it wasn't. What can we do? So there's that lack of accountability gives you this sort of get out of jail free card, and therefore you make decisions.
Yeah, but I think nowadays there are some kind of discussions around regulations about that, exactly change the laws to, avoid this type of situation, like people relying on the AI decisions to avoid the jail, for instance. But yeah, it's a big challenge. They don't have answers yet. Yep. Yeah,
accountability is really a big challenge, like we said, right, Manuel? Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next question. And this is about culture.
Culture is an emergent property of the way people interact with each other. So is behavior. The danger is when people start talking about behavior, they sooner or later get onto Skinner and behavioralism, which is the source of many things which are evil and wrong about the world, right? I mean, nudge theory has been largely discredited now if you look at the meta studies of the studies going on with it. Behavior and culture are both emergent properties. Change how people interact, both of them will emerge. It is that neither has a causal property on the other.
Okay. Okay, let me move on to the next one. Two questions in one, Dave.
I think some aspects of Agile, like short cycle, rapid development, self-organizing teams, there's a lot in Agile which links in with complexity because the practice wasn't theory informed. So, for example, self-organization comes to be, self-organizing with people I like to work with. Whereas if you know the theory, it's having to work with people you've never worked with before, you might not like. You still self-organize, but you want that diversity. So I think Agile suffered really badly from a lack of good theory in its early days. But it had some good intuitions about the sort of principles about the way people behave, right? The other thing is most Agile methods are actually about making complex things complicated, because that's what you do in software development. And it's not sufficiently acknowledged, right? So the great power of Scrum is its ability to take a complex world which is starting to be structured and take it the final step to the point where it can be structured into code. But it's not a truly complex systems method. Right? So good intuition, good practical sense. I will say that really XP was what Agile was meant to be about, but XP was high abstraction, low codification. So the Agile movement built around Scrum instead. Yeah.
I think you brought something interesting, Dave, and that's very discussed in Agile communities, which is self-organization, right? And I joined several discussions. And I think that the common sense within the community is that we need to bring as much as we can of self-organization. I don't think this is true, right? Because this depends on the context. I think we need to look for balance between organization and self-organization, and we need to bring the right amount of both, depending on the context. I don't know what you think about it.
Yeah, I do, but I think it's self-organization of things, not of people. So let me give you an example. One of the techniques we developed in DSDM, which was one of the 3 feeds of the Agile Manifesto, right? I was one of the 3 founders of DSDM, is we used to use time boxes. Now we've developed that method since. So in a time box, you say we have a minimal viable product, a maximum achievable product. We have a minimum available resource and a maximum available resource, and we have a delivery date. And then we say, if you can self-assemble a team with these roles, and the roles are very specific, you can bid to do the work, and you guarantee to deliver the minimum product for the maximum resource on this date, and any difference is something you get rewarded on. Now that always succeeds because people are choosing who they work with, but they're choosing who they work with within constraints. And by the way, you can run that over up to 3 months. It doesn't have to be a 2-week sprint. And in a multi-project environment, what really matters is data delivery. I mean, it's a nightmare if you've got people saying, well, I've self-organized, give me another 3 weeks, you get the perfect product. That's the last thing you want to hear, right? But again, you see the theory coming in. We know that people will take responsibility for people if they self-form a team. We know that certain types of diversity are needed for certain types of processes. So and we know that certain variation is needed. So the theory drives the practice, rather than the practice driving the theory. And that's the key thing from complexity science.
Yeah, right. Manoel.
Tatiana, very quickly. Very quickly, yeah, good one. I think there is an interesting relationship between agile and complexity in general, especially because like I can see some kind of danger here because in general, people in the agile community, they fell in love for complexity, right? Like people most of the time they see complex everywhere.
They fell in love with the word. They fell in love with the word, not the concept.
Exactly. It's fashion, right? It's sexy somehow. It's appealing. Yeah, everything is about complexity, and nothing is order or something like that. Then yeah, let's only focus on complexity, which is dangerous, right? You must pay attention to the context, understanding, read, sense making about the context for sure. And that's why, for example, nowadays in the Cynefin ecosystem, we are talking more about the composition and recombination, right? We must decompose different methods, different models, different strategies, and combine together for solve some specific problems for context, right? Which means sometimes like maybe you can combine piece from Agile frameworks, from piece from PMBOK, for instance, you know, and that would be the best way to solve the problem in a more coherent way, for instance. Then I think that's quite useful to rethink the understanding regarding complexity and the understanding regarding even the relationship between methods in general about the Agile ecosystem.
Yeah, and this is this match with Dave has mentioned before, right? My way of understanding this is that we don't evolve by imitation, we evolve by decomposition and recombination, right?
Yeah.
So this is what you have mentioned, Manoel. Yeah.
Yep,
okay,
exactly.
thank you for that. All right, so the next one is about complexity.
Oh, there's various ways. I actually just finished writing this up for the Cynefin Field Guide. One is to use a simple metaphor. So I talk about a ring of magnets which can change in polarity and strength with metal objects in the middle. And if I change one magnet, I can predict the results. 2 magnets, I can predict the result. 3 magnets, I can't. But if I can observe the developing patterns in real time and control some of the magnets, I can influence the result. So that's one way of doing it. Yeah. The Frozen 2 metaphor is a good one for anybody who hasn't seen Frozen 2 yet. In the middle of it, the heroine of the Frozen series, who's the younger sister without the magic, sings, "All I can do is do the next right thing." In complexity, that's called the adjacent possible. Yeah, you where am I? Where can I go next? I'll look again, right? So that's another way of doing it. And the third way is to talk about entangled systems. So think Alicia Geraro's famous metaphor, like bramble bushes in a thicket or a mango swamp. or I use fungal roots. So everything is entangled with everything else. Yeah, there's no cause and effect relationship, but you can see patterns. So there's various ways. Those are three I've used. Yeah.
All right, so we still have 15 minutes left. So I'll bring one more question, sorry, because I still would like to hear from each one of you.
I have a suggested question, Pachi.
Go ahead, please.
Dave, I don't know how much, this is, I guess, for all of us Brazilians, I don't know if you've been following the news about the tragic floods in the south of Brazil.
Yeah.
And of course, the situation is catastrophic. And also, I was thinking as we're talking about, there's some places that farmers have lost 3 meters of topsoil and got down to bare rocks. So in terms of like their environment is completely shifted. And I was wondering if in these last few minutes, maybe drinking from the field course guide, what you would suggest would be appropriate courses of action, considering complexity, considering so much.
Potentially worse than that. I mean, Rio hit 52 degrees centigrade last year. Yeah. If it had been 4 degrees higher, most people would have died. At 58 degrees, you can't shed heat fast enough. So the key thing in natural disasters is to avoid, you need to build human sensor networks. So that's why we use school children's ethnographers, sports clubs, etc. You need to create networks which can connect people horizontally and feed data into central government fast in real time. You can't construct them after the event when the disaster has happened. So for example, our school program, which anybody can adopt, is schools send their kids out to gather stories every week. That's really good for them as kids. It's good for the school. But now you've got a sensor network which can tell you what's happening in real time. Yeah. It's also, I think, about how one of the things we have to do with climate change is make people aware of local content, local consequences, so that they will be prepared to make sacrifices on a wider scale. Because until people are prepared to see the need for local sacrifice, they won't elect politicians who will make national sacrifices. So I think there's a wider need there. But human sensor networks are key to responding to a crisis, and the food crisis is going to get worse. That's where we need exaptive innovation, which is one of the things we work on. The ability to rapidly repurpose an existing capability for something novel. So, for example, in the floods in Thailand many years ago, I remember I studied this one. And people had about 1 hour's notice of the floods. And a couple of them realized, and it went viral on social media, that if you drove your car into a furniture plastic bag in your garage and sealed the plastic bag, then it wouldn't float away and it wouldn't be damaged by the water. And that was just brilliant, right? And it was an example of people under stress repurposing existing capability to handle a novel threat. So training people in that sort of thinking is also key. Yeah.
Back to you, Dutch.
Thank you. Thank you. I was thinking you were going to say something. All right, guys. So we still have 13 minutes left. And I'd like you all to feel free to bring up to the conversation. What do you think is most important from your perspective to leave as a last message for this group that is listening to us today, for people that will listen to us through the video that we'll share after this meeting, and considering all the topics that we brought up today to this conversation, like AI, like culture, like all those confusion that people make about mindset, about complexity and system thinking. So what do you think would be, from your perspective, a great last message for us to leave to everyone that is listening to us? Dave, you first.
Okay, so we have a thing called the AIMS framework, AIMS. So S stands for scaffolding. I'm going reverse order. So scaffolding is things that you structure in your environment that you know won't change. So for example, which side of the road do you drive on? Yeah, so you need some scaffolding, and you need to, it won't change, because that gives a degree of certainty in managing complexity. right? Some aspects of software architecture do that. M monitors, I just talked about that in response to Ian's questions. You need real-time monitors and real-back feedback loops. To do that, you need to build human sensor networks in advance of need for ordinary purpose that you can activate for extraordinary need. But you need to spot patterns early enough to exploit them or disrupt them. Yeah, so monitoring, real-time monitoring is key. Interactions are the most important thing you can change. Who interacts with who, when they interact, the context of their interaction, that's one of the things you can change. And then A stands for actants, which is a collective word for actors, i.e. people, constraints, things which contain things, and constructors, which are things like processes, which change things, right? So those are also things you can change. So you can change the actants, you can change the interactions, you monitor for the results, you create scaffolding degree of certainty, and you rapidly, increase the energy available to good things and disrupt the energy available to bad things. And that's very simple. Complexity at heart is a lot simpler than scientific management. There's only a few things you can manage, so you focus on managing those. You don't pretend you can manage the other stuff.
Right. So what you were saying is concentrate on things that you can change, right? And learn how to do it, right?
Got it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dave. Manoel and Ian, who go first?
Ian, like to go?
Sure, I'll just add into that, and I think it just touches, I mean, we didn't use the word, but one of the really cool things I learned with Dave was the topic of granularity. I realize that so many conversations, when we get people in a room and just get them discussing something and say, can you break it down? Because getting a simple example, if we talk about, global warming, it's just such a massive topic, and everyone sees it from a different way, and there's blame and there's guilt, and it's just a huge packet of things. But when you start breaking it down, it's a bit, if you get down to the small local, like what can I do in my neighborhood, or just my walk, to the gym, which is only a few blocks away. What can I do that, has a positive effect on, the issues of global warming or pollution or whatever it is? It's then becomes very tangible and very, I can execute on that. So I find that that's a huge component of the insights of complexity of, these big sort of buckets of challenges sometimes just get moved around and just pushed around. Nothing ever gets done. And, it's just someone else's problem. So going granular and using things like what Dave just said, like the aims and the action and so many of the frameworks of how can we get things down to a coherent level of understanding that we can actually have a conversation about it and we can agree that we're actually talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Ian's just reminded me of something I forgot as well. On my blog post of 4th of March this year, I published a set of 8, which is shortly to be 9 characteristics of how you intervene in a complex space. And granularity is one, obliquity is another. So those are easy to access.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, and it's really impressive how this is helpful, right? So I've been in many companies. It's very, I think the word is impressive. The amount of times that we see people saying, hey, I'm here in this company for 30 years and we have the same problems. So people don't evolve because they don't do what you were saying, right? They concentrate in big issues, they try to resolve it, and they don't move to the next step, and they remain on the same stage, right?
Tachi, in our facilitation, there are 2 post-its that are you just have to go back. Communication and roles and responsibilities. Those post-it notes, people write, oh, what's the problem? Oh, we've got problems with communication, roles and responsibilities. We should say, well, then you're human. Fair enough, well done, chuck it out, start again, because everything can almost fit under those 2 sort of umbrellas of, communication, roles and responsibilities. It just seems to be this place of whenever it's uncomfortable and I don't know what to do, I'll just put it under one of those 2. It's not clear, I don't know what to do, no one's told me what to do, and it must be down to poor communication. So that's kind of like just don't use those buckets because you don't get anywhere.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No, it's fine. It's fine. Well, actually, that was Dave's lessons as well. I think my last message is about you must pay attention on 3 elements when you think about complex, about the world in general, right? The 3 things are reality, perception, and knowledge. Think, for instance, that I have the 3 hands, okay? I have a hand here in the middle, right? Then imagine, for example, reality and knowledge, they are not aligning. Then you have perception as well. It's always moving, it's always volatile. Then the biggest challenge is like how we can face this type of dynamic environment, like the reality is changing all the time. The perception is so fragile sometimes, and the knowledge sometimes they are not well defined, or they are scarce in some extent. The answer for this is actually you must bring people together to try to combine different perceptions, try to identify patterns on those perceptions, that idea of sense making, for instance, and bring different levels of knowledge to try to face the reality. Okay, then when you think about Cynefin, story mapping, the different frameworks that we have in the ecosystem, it's all about that. It's all about like how we can create the sense making, make sense of the reality in a way that we can act on that in a more coherent way. And yeah, that's pretty much my message so far.
Thank you so much, Manoel. Well, my last message to you all, including Dave, Manoel, and Ian, is thank you. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for making this conversation so great. This is, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is our first meeting of our initiative, which is promoting connection. So our intention is bringing relevant conversations to this space, to Business Agility Institute in Brazil. So the idea is bringing people like Dave, like Manuel, like Ian, to give us the opportunity to learn from them. And then we will bring this conversation to our community internally and see how we can help people in Brazil, companies, to move on that. So we will have future meetings with great people. Our next one, as I mentioned in the beginning, will be in June 18th. So everybody is invited. And Manoel, Dave, and Ian, I do not have words to thank you more for this wonderful experience we had with you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Cheers.
Bye. Tchau, pessoal.
Tchau. Valeu, Ian. Valeu, Tati.
Tchau, tchau. Obrigada.
Parabéns pela iniciativa, viu?
Obrigada.
Muito legal. Parabéns. Bom te ver, gente.
Obrigada.
Vamos ver vocês também, viu? Tchau, tchau.
Tchau, tchau.